Okay, this lesson for the Koine project class concerns the issues that are often, let's say, the ambient issues surrounding Calvinism and Arminianism, namely, or specifically speaking, ideas of fatalism and futility. And we'll look at the text, 2 Peter 1:10, and then I would like to cite from some research of someone over a century ago, for example, Dr. J.R. Graves, and then read exactly how this text had something to do with avoiding or not tripping over fatalism in Calvin's ism or futility in Jake Arminianism. So let's look at the text first, since it's our language class, and we'll see what we can do. So we'll start off here, and I'll move on as I can as fast here. So this is wherefore, rather, and then we have adelphoi, brethren, plural. And then we have this samen, sate, sa. So it's aorist imperative. So this is where we get diligence, do your diligence. So let's say make every effort. And it's an urgent, since it's aorist, it's like now, do it right now. Yeah, spu da sate, which is from, okay, here we go. Spu dazo. You all check that out later. So check that out. And then we have this word, bion. Now this is a stable thing. This is an adjective, a stable thing. I can stabilize. So we don't need to be destabilized, for example, by Calvinism nor Arminianism. According to Dr. J.R. Graves, there's no reason to. And then, of course, by this text, we don't have any reason. So thus far, we have, wherefore, rather, brethren, urgently commanded us, make every effort. And let's see here, poi esthai, that's a present middle infinitive, to make, or to be making. And then remember that middle, you just put for yourselves. There, to be making for yourselves. And then we have to find what it is we're speaking of. So here we are, tain, that's accusative. The, and this is, it's placing, the call, and then chi, and you have a Granville sharp here. You all know about this. So let's widen this bracket out. But that is, and we have ek, again, choice, hemon, of you all. So thus far we have, wherefore rather, brethren, make every effort. There's urgency there. There's a nounness to it. To be making for yourselves, the call, that is choice of you all. Again, this, I would say, the object of the call, the one called, the one chosen. There we go. Then we have, let me see, tauta, and then gar, that post-positive conjunction, for, giving us an explanation. These things. Then we have poi ontes, present active participle, for, by, make it instrumental. Doing these things, yes, by doing, wait a minute, by doing, or, now we've got make already. Yes, let's put by making these things, there we go, by making these things a firm, a stable thing. Yes, by making these things a stable thing. Let me see. What's that word? Sate? Pote? Let me see here. You all might not, this is ever. Then we have, well, I left out that may. Absolutely not. So absolutely not. You absolutely not. So you all might absolutely not trip ever. Okay, so let's just stop there. That's our lesson from the language. And then let's look at the article. I'll quote from Dr. J.R. Graves. He has books in the 1800s. He went on and said that God's absolute will is the rule of his action as the sovereign of the universe, and that these acts do not conflict with our accountability. For the accomplishment of this will, he does not ask us to pray. That is, according to Dr. J.R. Graves, he makes the distinction between God's purposed will, which nothing can stop it, and then the commanding will, if you will, and that which pleases him, which we have commandments, where we even have consequences. In the day that you eat, dying, you will surely die, for example. So he says, number 2, that God's pleasurable or commanding will is the rule of our acts. And this will is that we should obey the truth and be saved. And he grants us his spirit and grace to help us if we will accept of them. So if we are lost, the guilt lies at our own door, that we may obey God and the world be saved. We should both labor and pray. So to this end, he said, we should both labor and pray that we may obey God and that the world be saved. That our election or our being chosen, notice how he words that out, elected to salvation, is something with which we have to do. So we have something to do with it. And he says to make sure. So he's referring back to this text. How? By believing the truth. Now you'll hear this in some of the, especially on faithalone.org, Grace Evangelical Society, Soteriology101.com, Dr. Leighton Flowers, also Dr. Bob Wilkin of faithalone.org. They'll speak of believe the truth, trust Jesus for everlasting life, that you can believe, you should believe, and you would dare not want another circumstance where it could one day be said you would have, as Jesus said of the people in Sodom and Gomorrah when he was pronouncing judgment on those in Capernaum. He said if the mighty works that have been done here in Capernaum had been done in Sodom, for example, they would have repented. Now that doesn't mean all of them would have believed and trusted Messiah of the true and living God that would warn them so graciously to warn them of impending doom, but rather it does. There are obviously people that have that much regard to mind a threat from God so that they can continue to live. Among them would be those who would trust him for life beyond this, which is called everlasting life. So Jesus is the one who taught that they could have in Sodom, that is, those citizens of Sodom could have, should have, and under other circumstances, the miracles he did in Capernaum, they would have. But the people in Capernaum who could, should, now would not in light of the miracles. So that's quite a a living dynamic, if there's some way of expressing it. We teach living theism because the Bible teaches He's the living God. We're living souls. We have a mind to think. We're subject to persuasion. Even the ones in the letter Galatia, those churches in Galatia had been bewitched and so quickly transposed themselves away from the one who called them in an unmerited kind of favor from Christ, that Paul marveled. And he even said, this persuasion is not from God. So those who were born from above, who had trusted Jesus Christ for everlasting life, had been made alive unto God, being in Christ Jesus, were now there as ecclesias in the southern region of Galatia, and yet they were being subjected and were susceptible to other persuasions that weren't from God. So Paul stepped in immediately under the purview of being sent as the apostle from Jesus Christ, and he, by the letters, the letter that he wrote, and that letter we have today, those scripted instructions inspired by Holy Spirit, he corrected that by intervening and, if you will, trying to break the spell of that bewitched state of mind. So we see that people are susceptible, and even those who are born again can be persuaded or be influenced by persuasion that's not from God. So it's the reality is we're in the living reality. And this is where this admonition in 2 Peter, for example, is for us. Go back to all the things previously stated. And this is why we find urgency for us to make every effort now, right now, do the diligence, be diligent to be making for yourselves the call, that is the choice of you all. Notice that. So here we go on. He said, we learn why so many are called and so few elected or chosen, because so few will believe the truth. So few are willing to be saved upon the plan by which God has determined to save the lost world. That's why even Dr. Charles Spurgeon would say, you must trust Him for eternal salvation, not some temporal moment for an opportunity to act out a future basis of performance that then added to the moment you believed Jesus Christ for eternal salvation, you could then maybe be saved ultimately. And finally, he said that's not the gospel. Believe Him for eternal salvation. Faithalone.org, the genius of Dr. Bob Wilkin is to guard the moment you trust Jesus Christ for everlasting life and understand that clearly in the absolute reality in which it's presented and communicated in the Scriptures. We trust Him for everlasting life. Dr. Spurgeon, Charles Spurgeon, said, trust for eternal salvation. Evangelism Explosion, if you remember that years ago, and what little I've reviewed, most of what I've learned about it now has been through faithalone.org, but they were very careful, and that was a product of Dr. D. James Kennedy that was published as long ago as 1962, and they were very careful to assure that the person to whom they were bearing witness or who had heard the message preached, the gospel, that they understood you trust 100% for everlasting life, and you trust that you have it because Jesus said it. Now that's faith and faith alone. So let's move on. It says here that to be, number 5, his point, that to be a Calvinist is to be a fatalist. For if God predetermined and decreed to save a definite number irrespective of moral character, now here's his qualifier, irrespective of moral character, and this certain quantity cannot be increased or diminished, and only this number Christ's death benefited, then the personal and everlasting destiny of each one is irrevocably fixed, and no act of the creature can alter it, even though he should believe the truth. He concludes the non-elect could not make their election sure, because this wouldn't apply to them, nor could the elect make theirs less sure. Now, I think that's what some have called strict determinism that leads to fatalism, but there's many more pages here. But Dr. J.R. Graves is very well renowned in the South, especially the emphasis on the ecclesia, which the church letters can't be surpassed in the case for the ecclesia. That is Christ, that is the ecclesia. So there's really nothing that I'm aware of except his point is how would we do this? How would we make stable or stabilize, make our call, the call That is the choice of us a stable thing. And how would we know and have this great confidence? For by making these things, yes, making these things, pointing back here, for by making these things a stable, a firm thing, which is over here. See if I can draw my line there. There we go. A stable thing. Then you all, that's second person. You all. Oh my, I've got the wrong marker up here. You all, yes, might absolutely not ever trip. There we go. So this is a good text. It's an admonition. There's much that precedes it. You all know to read the context from a hermeneutics, holistic, bring it all in. But this is enough for this lesson. So have a blessed day, and you can avoid the fatalism of a Calvinistic fallible construct and the futility of an Arminian fallible construct. So have a blessed day.